weaving his way through the tables, smiling broadly in khaki shorts and a blue UCLA t-shirt, Matt looked a picture of health and happiness. "Hey." Claire met back at him. "Cassie not with you? I just dropped her off at her Pilates class. Why, I'm not good enough for you now." "You'll do." Grinning, Claire pushed a small, gold-wrapped package across the table. Matt raised an eyebrow. "For me? Hey, I can give presents to you no. It's an engagement gift. Don't get too excited, though, it's nothing much." Matt unwrapped the box. Inside was a simple but elegant antique men's watch, with a battered leather strap and a rosegold face. On the back were engraved the intertwined initials M and C, and the date of their engagement. Nothing much. "My God, Claire, it's gorgeous. It must have cost a fortune." "Not really, Claire Lead. I'm just so happy that you're happy. You deserve it, Matt. You really do." Matt was happy. It wasn't the soaring elation, the addictive thrill had felt in Bali with Lisa. But in its own way, he told himself, what he had with Cassie was just as precious. Cassie brought him peace and security and contentment. She didn't give a damn about his money, she was nothing like Raquel, and she never questioned him about the past. Loving Cassie was a choice that Matt had made, something rational and good that he had decided to do. Loving Lisa had been an impulse, the irresistible pull of a powerful and dangerous drug. Matt would never forget the high he had felt at the time. But he knew that that drug had damn near killed him. He could never go back. Matt ordered 2 soft-boiled eggs and an open salmon sandwich for himself and a duck breast panini for Claire while she fired questions at him about the wedding. Had he set a date yet? Booked a venue? Who was on the guest list? Were Danny and Celine Maguire coming over from France? Had Matt heard from Danny at all? Matt answered all the questions good-naturedly, referring his sister to Cassie for all bright, cake and flower-related details. But the basics were simpler. It would be a small wedding, in the garden of Matt's new, Nantucket-style Brentwood Park home. The Maguires had been invited but were not expected to attend. They'd somehow managed to have 3 children, 3 Ausrufezeichen since the trial, and their newest baby was still too small to travel, but according to Danny's emails they were very happy. Angela Yacker's ghost had finally been laid to rest. David Ishak had sent Matt a case of champagne back when the Azrael documentary came out and wrote him a very kind letter while he was at Wildwood. But other than that, Matt had deliberately severed all ties with anyone connected to the case or to Sophia Buster. His wedding to Cassie would mark the beginning of a new, happier chapter in his life. The old book was closed. 20 minutes later, back behind the wheel of his Range Rover, Matt switched on the radio. NPR News from Washington blasted the familiar, sing-song voice of Lakshmi Singh into the car. The first 2 reports washed over Matt. New growth figures from the Fed and something about global warming from the National Science Foundation that he ought to care about but didn't. He was thinking about Cassie and how cute she always looked after Pilates, sweating and energized, convinced that she was a mess without makeup when actually she looked more natural and sexy than ever. Swinging the car right onto Montana, he suddenly screeched to a halt, narrowly missing slamming into an SUV in front of him. In breaking news, Lakshmi Singh was saying Frankie Mancini, better known to the public as one of the 2 Azrael killers, is reported to have taken his own life while on death row at San Quentin Prison in Central California. Mancini was awaiting execution for his role in the murders of 4 men between 1996 and 2006 and after numerous appeals was expected to be executed later this year. It's understood that Mancini was found hanging in his cell in the early hours of this morning. The woman in the SUV was yelling at Matt, shaking her fist out the window. Behind him, honking vehicles began to drive around him. Matt was completely oblivious. Mancini was dead. Matt had held on to his hatred for Frankie Mancini for a long time. Had needed someone to hate so he could continue loving Lisa. But now that Frankie was actually gone, Matt felt none of the satisfaction, none of the sense of closure and of justice rendered that had expected to feel. Instead he felt robbed. Had interviewed just about everyone connected with the Azrael killings for his documentary, and during the trial had heard Lisa's, Sophia's, side of the story. But the one person who knew the most about what had happened on those terrible nights, and why it had happened, had never uttered a word about his crimes. Whatever his motives and feelings, Frankie Mancini had taken them to his grave. Even his death had been on his own terms. When Cassie got into the car, she'd already heard the news. CNN was playing in the locker rooms. "Are you okay?" she asked Matt. "Sure." He still looked dazed. "I wonder how it happened. I mean, aren't they supposed to have all death row inmates on 24-hour suicide watch?" Matt nodded absently. He wasn't thinking about Frankie Mancini, or how he'd managed to outwit the authorities at San Quentin and take his own life. He was thinking about another prisoner, behind another set of walls, only 100 miles or so north of where he and Cassie were talking. A prisoner he hadn't thought about for a long, long time. A prisoner had trained himself to forget. Was she grieving? Was she suffering? The thought of her distressed and alone tore through Matt's heart like a drill. He winced. "Are you sure you're okay?" Cassie's face clouded with anxiety. "We can do the wedding planner another day, if you want." The wedding planner. Shit. Had totally forgotten. Like a physical weight he forced thoughts of Lisa out of his mindestens. Our wedding. Our future. Yeah. I'm sure. He forced a smile. "Let's go choose that cake." Chapter 37. Matt and Cassie Daly's wedding day was a triumph. The garden in Brentwood exploded with flowers, the sun shone brightly and the bride and groom looked as happy and in love as two people could possibly be. The small group of family and friends who came to toast their union with non-alcoholic fruit punch, Matt had given up drinking in support of Cassie, and half their friends were in Zweier, all agreed that the intimate, low-key ceremony was a perfect reflection of the relationship of this adorable couple, both of whom had been through so much. It wasn't their happy ending. It was their happy beginning. The honeymoon in Tahiti was idyllic, with nothing to do but sleep, snorkel and make love beneath the stars. Occasionally thoughts of another, earlier experience of paradise in Indonesia flashed into Matt's mindestens, but he banished said each one firmly, remembering the mantras had learned at Wildwood, little sayings had come to believe and that had literally saved his life. "My mind is my own. I can control it. The past is gone. Only the present was real. Only the present mattered. And the present belonged to Cassie." At first Matt struggled, being so totally cut off from the outside world. The private atoll they were staying on was the last word in reclusive luxury, but by design, the honeymoon villa had no internet access, television or phone. Cassie made fun of Matt's twitchiness. "I swear to God you're like an addict. Is it really that hard to go 2 weeks without Anderson Cooper or an inbox full of junk mail?" And after a few days, Matt started to relax to a degree he hadn't managed in years. Perhaps it was his imagination, but he felt as if even his back and leg pain was receding. He swam every day in the warm, pale blue waters and often walked from the house to the beach and back without his cane. In every possible sense, his marriage to Cassie was healing him. Matt felt profoundly grateful. It wasn't until they got back to LA that the marriage faced its first big test. Claire Michaels came to meet them at the airport. Both Matt and Cassie instantly knew that something was wrong when they saw that Claire and her husband, Doug, were accompanied by 2 uniformed police officers. At customs, they were pulled aside into a private room. "What is it?" Cassie asked, panicked. "Is it Brandon? Is he okay?" "Your son's fine, ma'am," the older cop assured her. "There's nothing to worry about. We're really only here as a courtesy. In case you had any questions." "Questions about what?" "Said Matt." Claire took her brother's hand. "Matt, Sophia Buster died while you were away. It happened last Wednesday, but we had no way to reach you." "Died?" Matt couldn't take it in. "What do you mean? How?" "It was an accident," said the policeman. "It wasn't public knowledge, but she'd been allowed some limited freedoms at Altarcito over the last 6 months, as it was felt that her mental state was improving and she was no longer a danger to society." Matt nodded absently. "She was on a hiking trip somewhere in the mountains," the policeman continued. "She was with 2 other patients and 4 members of the staff when it happened." Claire took over the narration. "Apparently she slipped and fell into a deep ravine. They called 911 and sent down search and rescue helicopters, everything, but where she fell was like a crevasse, incredibly narrow and miles deep. They never recovered the body. But, Matt, she'd have been dead on impact. She wouldn't have suffered." Matt stared at his sister blankly. "They're sure she's dead?" "Quite sure. One of the guards and one other patient were there with her when she fell. There's no way anybody could have survived that fall. The helicopters were only ever there to try and extract a body. Matt, honey. Cassie wrapped a protective arm around her husband's waist. Do you want to sit down? I know it's a huge shock, said Claire. But we wanted you to know before you went through arrivals. As you can imagine, the media have been all over the story. They knew you were coming back today, so there's a whole horde of photographers and reporters out there all wanting a reaction. Cassie looked horrified. From their perfect honeymoon to this. It wasn't fair. The cop caught her anxious look. Don't worry, Mrs. Daly. We'll escort you outside. We have a car waiting. The words Mrs. Daly jolted Matt out of his stupor. Cassie was his wife now. His first thought must be for her, not for himself. I'm okay, he said reassuringly, pulling her into his arms. It was a shock, that's all. But I'm fine. And maybe. He hesitated to say it, but he made himself go on. Maybe it's for the best. Both Cassie and Claire looked at him wide-eyed. Not that I would have wanted it to happen. But if she didn't suffer, maybe that's a better way to go than lingering into old age, behind bars, with nothing to do but dwell on the past, you know. Cassie nodded. She knew. Matt kissed her, closing his eyes and breathing in the scent of her, searching for reassurance, for safety, for love. And for us too. It's awful and it's tragic. But it draws a line. The past really is gone now. Cassie Daly looked up at her husband and burst into tears of relief. At last, at long last, the nightmare was over. Once and for all.